Florida is facing a $3 billion shortfall, putting lawmakers between a rock and a hard place. Which programs will survive and who will be hurt the most? Then mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most popular of them all? Governors, that is. We'll have all that and more on this edition of Power Play with our guests, Aaron DeLotte with the Orlando Sentinel and Paul Fleming with Gannett. Thank you, gentlemen. Why don't we get started? Let's talk about the budget. I know that you have been working the Capitol. What is the mood like at the Capitol? Aaron?
Well, it's somber. I mean, there's the traditional pressure points that develop between the House and Senate over the transportation funding and health care. There is a real desire this year to try to get the budget done sooner and give the governor less leverage at the end of the session, this being his last session as governor. And so they are attempting to drive through a painful budget in record speed.
Paul, your thoughts? I mean, once again, we're looking at possibly $1 billion coming down from the federal government that can help offset this big hole that we have in the budget.
With a projected gap of up to $3.2 billion between spending and what's coming in, that $1 billion that theoretically is coming in from the federal government to supplement Medicaid spending in Florida's budget, that's how they handle that is one key difference between the two chambers. The Senate President Atwater moves that money around and makes more cuts to health spending. The House, to a greater degree, uses that to prop up health spending and keep it where it is, closer to what the governor's recommended budget had. Resolving that is going to be a difference between the chambers. And Senator Atwater got a shot from his own health budget chair, Senator Darrell Peden, last week, bemoaning the fact that taking away that money from what he thinks are critical funds that he says have already been cut to the marrow.
So is the Senate President sort of that roadblock that between, you know, the Health and Human Services advocates who are desperately trying to save their programs, and what happens to those people? And have they been reaching out to you? You know, what have you heard from them at the Capitol?
There's just the start of a reach out. I mean, a lot of these numbers have only been out about a week, and you're starting to see some of the people come up to start testifying. But you know, the focus on the Senate side is more interesting when you look at it in the context of what the incoming more conservative leadership is trying to impose through the budget, which is more expansion of Medicaid reform, more constraints on spending. Some of the changes that if you think about Medicaid reform, when it came out in 2005, the resistance was from the Senate, and now the Senate is including Medicaid reform in its budget first. It's leading the charge.
And very quickly, Paul, we last year $2.2 billion in taxes, an increase in taxes and fees. This is an election year. Is everybody sort of scrambling now to see what they can do?
Well, again, a difference between the Senate and the House, and in this case, the Senate, led by a candidate for statewide office, is looking to pull back some of those fee increases from last year. And the House has its own includes tax cuts in its budget, but not to the extent that the Senate does. And it's again how you're shifting around that money that's available. And Aaron makes a good point about it's being driven by incoming leadership, which will take over next year, excuse me.
And moving along, public policy polling. We're talking about the most popular governor in the state, and any thoughts on that?
Well, the poll, of course, you're referring to showed, asked survey respondents to list their most popular and least popular governors. And of course, what it shows, first and foremost to me, is that the electorate has totally changed since when Bob Graham and Bob Martinez were governors. Most of the people that were probably polled had to be prompted to, remind them who those guys were. In terms of Jeb Bush, who ranked the top as the most popular and the least popular, if that makes any sense to viewers. It simply shows that he was a polarizing man when he was a governor, and he's still a polarizing figure, and it's a Marco Rubio type of candidate that relies on polarizing the electorate.
And then Governor Christ's number is not so strong.
Well, I think that shows a difference in being the former governor in memory as opposed to being the governor who is in making decisions now and doing things that you can decide whether you like or don't like, and so your popularity is going to go down.
And very quickly, the Coast poll, that also showed that Governor Christ running for the U.S. Senate and Marco Rubio, actually Marco Rubio is ahead, yet he has some problems if he faces off against Meek, and his negative numbers were pretty high. Do you see both camps becoming more effective by throwing out the negative accusations at each other?
I don't see the Chris camp becoming any more effective because there's no way to run to the right of Marco Rubio. And so the only alternative is to throw out as much anecdotal evidence as you can unearth about his fiscal irresponsibility. But, partisan Republican voters have a pretty good idea who Marco Rubio is.
Well, and Governor Christ has shown no interest in running to the right of Marco Rubio. He's made his stand in his State of the State address and saying this is who I am and what I'm going to run on. I think that in these polls, as you mentioned, it's the negatives that are the interesting thing, and the fact that Kendrick Meek remains an unknown as each Republican candidate becomes more known. In the case of Marco Rubio, of course, Governor Christ was well known. Then those negatives begin to rise, and it's just part of the evolution of the campaign.
With that, gentlemen, let's move on to our power play of the week. Paul, your power play of the week?
I'm going to go with Speaker Larry Creedle, who this week did an odd thing for a legislative leader. He backed off of an idea of his and said he would not pursue his bill to exempt 911 recordings from public records.
Aaron?
Andy Ford, president of the Florida Education Association. Teachers Union has gone full frontal assault on the merit pay plan in the legislature.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and thank you, our viewers. For the latest on all your political news, please visit SafeYourReview.com.